Thank you, Denny. It's a pleasure to be here with you folks this morning, and it's also my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for the breakfast this morning. Bob Stallman, a rice and cattle producer from Columbus, Texas, is president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, the nation's largest and most influential general farm organization. The 11th president in the organization's history, Mr. Stallman was first elected president on January 13th, 2000. Prior to becoming AFBF president, Mr. Stallman was president of the Texas Farm Bureau. He became a member of the AFBF's Board of Directors in 1994. A 1974 honors graduate of the University of Texas, Mr. Stallman joined the family farm in 1975. A member of St. Paul Lutheran's Church in Columbus, Texas, Mr. Stallman has 2 daughters, and I was informed the most important part of this bio is that he also has 8 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming the president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, Mr. Bob Stallman.
Thank you. Good job. Good job. Good morning, y'all. You liked that, didn't you? It is great to be with you. This is a great morning. It's almost springtime, clear sky, little frost out there. I got behind a Southern States fertilizer spreader truck, headed out, and it ain't Washington, D.C. I am very pleased to be here and join you. After seeing those videos, I'm going to change up everything I'd planned on saying, so y'all just going to have to bear with me while I wing it here. Our farm, your plate. I couldn't think of a better theme, actually, when we're talking about some of the issues and challenges facing agriculture today. We that are involved in agriculture understand pretty clearly what these challenges and issues are. Sometimes our friends and neighbors who are not as closely involved really don't. So the first thing they tell you in speaker school is to know your audience. So I'm going to ask an audience participation question. It's to help me know you. It's also to see how many of you are awake. How many of you are involved with agriculture? Okay, very good. Now I'm going to tell you how you came out on that test in a little while, because some of you didn't do so good. Let me throw out a couple of statistics, and believe me, it's only a couple, and after that I'm through, and then you don't have to worry about listening to any policy wonk stuff. And I learned some of this from my mother. After I got this position, my local county was having an event much like this in the evening and wanted me to come back and speak. And my proud parents wanted to come hear their son speak as the newly elected president of the American Farm Bureau Federation. So I got in front of the crowd after they ate, and I gave what I thought was really a good speech. And so after all the thing was over with, I went back to my parents' house for a little while with them. And so I asked my mother, I said, well, what did you think about that, Mother? And she said, well, I have to tell you, you talked too long. You talked about things that people really didn't understand, and you got to remember they just want to get to the door prizes. So I've taken that to heart throughout my Farm Bureau career. She gave me a pretty good understanding of audiences. All right, here's your couple of statistics, a couple of numbers, 22 million and 30%. Well, the 22 million are the number of people in this country that are employed in some part of the food chain, from farm gate to consumer plate. About 7% of our population. Huge economic impact. As has already been referenced in Kentucky, 30% basically of your economy revolves around agriculture in some form. So the importance is clear. We have 2.1 million farmers in this country, and we're feeding 313 million people in addition to a whole bunch of the rest of the world's population. And the huge challenge before us is, how are we going to do that by 2050, where now there are 7 billion people in the world, there's going to be 9 billion people in the world, and we're going to need to produce about 70% more food than what we do. It's going to be a big challenge. Okay, that's all the statistics. These videos give me an opportunity this morning to talk about opportunities and challenges because they represent opportunities and challenges. So bear with me as I try to describe this. The Peterson brothers video, you know, that was a viral sensation. First time I saw it, I was grinning from ear to ear like many of you were when you just got through looking at it. One thing I thought about was when I was that age and I was down on the farm, had I been doing that, I was thinking about what my father would have been saying. Most of it would not be repeatable in front of this crowd. And the end of that would be, why don't you get back to work? But what those boys did shows what has changed in our society. And frankly, it represents one of the biggest challenges is how do you communicate with a society now that is so far removed from agriculture. Majority of people really don't have a clue, 3, 4, and 5 generations removed. It used to be everybody had some experience on the farm. They went out to the grandfather's farm at least a couple weeks in the summer. You know, sometimes their parents were farmers, but you know, all that's changed. That's changed dramatically. 2.1 million farmers, that's the USDA definition. And that definition is if you grow $1,000 worth of product. Now, you know, you don't even have to have a very good horse to raise to get $1,000. Now, the reality is about 200,000, roughly, and you can cut the statistics any way you want to. Farmers in this country raise about 85% of the food. So we have a very small demographic, very small number of farmers and ranchers that are actually producing the majority, 85% of all this food and fiber. So we are in a situation that as society has moved away from the farm, and people now are more interested in food than ever before. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're a locavore, let me see if I can get this right. Locavore, omnivore, carnivore, or vegetarian, you know, you have an interest in the food you eat. And that interest has expanded into how food is raised and grown. Now, in this modern world of communication that we live in, we know there are a lot more opinions that can get put out to a lot more people. Now, I'm not sure the quality of those opinions is any better, but I guarantee you the quantity is a lot greater. And so you have a lot of pundits, you have a lot of commentators, you have a lot of activists that want to portray some viewpoint. You know, these are the only kind of foods you should eat to live to be 150. Or this is the only way agriculture, farmers and ranchers should be able to work, whether it's relative to the environment or how you raise your animals. So we got a lot of opinions. Frankly, some of them are misinformed, in my opinion. But that's not really the issue. The issue isn't fact. The issue is how do we relate to the rest of society as farmers and ranchers so we can reconnect, if you will, with the consumers in this country. Let me go back to the test I gave you. Everybody that didn't raise their hand had the wrong answer. Reason's pretty simple. That breakfast line you went through, every bite of food that came off that line came from a farmer, rancher, somewhere. If you eat, you are involved in agriculture. That's a bumper sticker that showed up, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. Still resonates because it's still true. Everybody does have an interest. And it's just today we have some percentage of the population that have a much greater interest. And so agriculture has to figure out how to deal with that. We have to maintain consumer trust in how we raise and grow food. The Peterson brothers, what they did shows the power of this social media interconnected society we have. And it also shows the opportunity that we have in agriculture to get our opinions out there. Agriculture has been working, all the organizations involved in agriculture have been working now for, I don't know, a decade, trying to crack this nut, as they say, trying to figure out how to reach out to consumers, try to make that connection. And frankly, we haven't done a very good job at it. I am used to giving a speech and telling people the facts. You know, by gosh, if you'll just listen to me, I'll tell you what it is you're supposed to think. It hadn't worked too well. Consumers really aren't interested in that. So we've been failing at what we've been trying to do. Now, I think we're getting better. We have created, and I say we, I'm talking about broad agriculture across this country, an organization called the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance. The sole purpose of that group, we don't do policy stuff, we don't get involved in all these response to issues that arise and those kind of things. What we're doing is trying to create a dialogue with consumers and using a multitude of platforms to do that. And we've done an extensive amount of research, and the findings are pretty interesting. Consumers really don't care about the message we used to use about safe, affordable, abundant food. It's all true, but those are table stakes. They take them for granted. What consumers want to know when they're looking at a farmer is what you are growing going to be healthy for me and my children in the long term. And there's a greater interest in how we do things. The critics of agriculture don't like big anything. They don't like big agriculture. They don't like big companies. But the reality is that's where a lot of the product comes from. But what consumers want and what we need to provide as farmers and ranchers are choices. If you want to be a locavore and provide local food, that's a choice. Farmers and ranchers can provide that. You know, if you want to eat a lot of salads like my doctor tells me to do, then we should provide that. The point is consumers need to understand what those choices mean as opposed to being told by others what it is they're supposed to think about those choices. And the only way we know how to do that, and the research supports it, is to make a direct connection with consumers. I mean, in essence, you're doing that with this breakfast. You know, we have some people who produce agricultural products here. We have some who consume and, you know, who live here in Bowling Green but may not be that directly connected to a farm. And that connection is what we're trying to do. Now, it was difficult getting this started because two farmers in a coffee shop in the morning will probably have 3 different opinions about anything. But we got over 60 agricultural organizations together in one entity to pool our resources and reach out to consumers. And we're doing things, anybody ever hear of Food Inc.? The documentary that Michael Pollan was highlighted in and all that. We're actually one of the things we're doing, one of the many things we're doing is actually creating a documentary with an award-winning Hollywood producer. Now, it's not anti-Food Inc., but it's about the future of agriculture. It's going to talk about young farmers and ranchers and coming into the operations that they've developed and either come into as a family or developed on their own. It's going to relay to the public, you know, what real agriculture is about today. And look for that. I'm not going to say it's going to be in all of your local theaters. It's a documentary type film, but it'll be out in the fall. And the point is, it's not just what we're doing as an organization. The second part of the message is telling farmers and ranchers that it's your responsibility to get out there and make these connections. And today, you can do that. You can do that very easily through social media. Now, I'm getting a little old here, but even I know how to use Facebook. And you can reach out to consumers and answer their questions if you're involved in agriculture. And y'all are doing that here. Some of you are doing that very well. We just need to do more of it. So that represents, you know, the challenge we're facing, and the opportunity, as the Peterson brothers showed, is to be able to engage in this new social media. Now, the Paul Harvey, So God Made a Farmer, I remember when that came out. That hits you right here, doesn't it? How many of you actually saw the Super Bowl ad? I don't want to, all right, most of you saw the Super Bowl ad. Now, that's a real challenge, and let me tell you why. Now, first thing I'll tell you is, remember, Dodge is trying to sell pickups here, okay? That was the purpose of the ad. And no disrespect to Dodge. We've been having Dodge four-wheel drives on our farm since the 1960s. They make a great product. But the point of that was to sell pickups. Now, if you looked very carefully at all those still photos, and there are some remarkable photos, actually some of them came from a book that Farm Bureau helped promote several years ago. Y'all did a better job of putting photos of modern agriculture with what you did with So God Made a Farmer than what they did. They had a lot of kind of old stuff. They had an old Case tractor that was the generation before the one that I spent tons of hours on as a teenager. You know, they didn't show the big equipment. They didn't show the livestock. And there was a reason for that, because the general public doesn't like big, and Dodge understands that. But so it sort of misrepresents what American agriculture is all about. And that's another one of our challenges, is the perception of consumers about farming and ranching. They love, our research shows that consumers love farmers and ranchers. You know, that's the Norman Rockwell nostalgia, okay? Now, I ain't never had a Thanksgiving like Norman Rockwell portrayed with the family, and I hope some of you have. I've had some good ones, don't get me wrong. But let's just say he made a career out of selling nostalgia, and that's great. But it doesn't portray the reality of what we do in agriculture. And y'all actually, as I said, did a better job of that. So that's our challenge, is this, the warm fuzzies that people think about farmers and ranchers versus the farming and the ranching that we actually do today, in whatever form we choose to do it, whether we're using biotechnology or producing organic products. And incidentally, just so you know, we raise organic rice on a part of my farm. So that's what it's all about as far as we're concerned in agriculture. In terms of the alliance effort, is farmers and ranchers should have the opportunity to produce any product that consumers want and are willing to pay for. And we want to do a better job of informing them about what all those choices mean. I was asked to talk about the Farm Bill, and if you really want me to put you to sleep in a coma, I can go through it title by title. I'm not going to do that. But I want to talk about it in more general terms. That is an issue that is obviously based out of Washington, if you will. And I will tell you that not much is happening, because if you read the news stories, most of the effort in Washington, D.C. today revolves around the fiscal discussions, the budget talks, how to keep the government running, how to figure out how to cut government without cutting the services everybody wants, as is happening with the sequester. So all that's taking up all the oxygen, if you will, in Washington right now. And we're going to get to the Farm Bill discussion and get that finished, hopefully, this year. You know, we had the 2012 Farm Bill. Well, we didn't get a 2012 Farm Bill, so now we're in 2013. There's some people saying we won't get a 2013 Farm Bill, and pretty soon we're just going to call it the never-ending Farm Bill. But I think actually we will move forward. What I'm going to convey to you, though, is the importance in general of what a Farm Bill is. Once again, there are a lot of critics of the Farm Bill and the dollars that are associated with it. You read it in the New York Times article, Chicago Tribune, commentators, conservative and liberal both, that don't like the Farm Bill. Well, the Farm Bill isn't just about the support that it provides to farmers and production agriculture in this country. That's only Title I out of more than 10 titles. It's also mostly about nutrition, about feeding those who are perhaps less fortunate than we are. But then things like research and extension, Joanne, that's in there. We have rural development, renewable fuels, crop insurance, risk management, which was already referenced here. So it's a huge piece of legislation that has a huge impact all across America in a bunch of different ways. Now let me tie two things together. And we really view, and I think from a matter of government policy, the view is that we will spend some taxpayer dollars to support certain elements of our economy, and it's done across a lot of other elements, when we feel like the national interest is at stake. Had we had the 2012 drought 20 years ago, and we're not sure we're through with it yet, we hope we are, but we're not sure we're through with it. Had we had that same drought, the outcomes would have been dramatically different for this country. And let me explain what the outcomes would have been, and it gets back to modern agriculture. First, given the severity of the drought and the climatic conditions, we still produced more off of our farms than was projected. The reason for that's very simple. It's much improved genetics, much improved seeds that we have today. That's technology. So that helped us minimize to some extent the devastating impact of the drought. Didn't do it all, obviously, but it helped minimize it. The other piece was, had we had this 20 years ago, you would be driving around this spring looking at a bunch of signs on farms that talked about auction. There would have been a lot of farmers out of business. But our risk management, our crop insurance programs help make up that difference. And you're going to hear a lot about how much money was spent on crop insurance. Yes, some was spent on it and more was spent on it because the drought was so severe. But that also maintained our entire production base out there, and that money won't be spent when conditions return to normal. It's risk management. It's just like you insure the risk on your house or your car. It's there for the bad times. And it allows us as a country to have a much more stable production system. So when you hear all the news stories about the Farm Bill, just remember some of this, that it's an important piece of legislation. Could it be better? Yes, it can always be better. Are some dumb things in there? Yes, there's some dumb things in there. But the reality is the package as a whole help allow this country to maintain the most productive agricultural system in the world. It's that simple. Because Mother's looking down upon me and has pretty much told me it's time to wrap up, let me leave you with this challenge. And it's a challenge for those of you that are involved in agriculture directly, and it's a challenge for those who consume our agricultural products that maybe aren't directly related to agriculture. For the farmers and the ranchers in the room, your challenge is pretty simple. I've already described it. Be willing to step up and make a connection with those who don't understand agriculture. Be willing to have a dialogue. Don't talk at them. Ask them what their concerns are, and then answer their questions about what you raise and grow and how you do it very openly and honestly. Create a connection. So the next time that particular consumer reads one of these kind of outrageous stories out of the paper or sees a documentary on TV or whatever the case may be, they'll think a little bit more. They'll think, I see this, but this farmer here that I've been talking to, he's telling me what's really happening on his farm, and those two things don't connect up too well. So it'll make them think a little bit. For those of you who aren't involved in agriculture and have questions, reach out to a farmer. Find that farmer that's willing to have that dialogue with you and talk about what you raise and grow, how you do it, why the food you have creates choices for me as a consumer, and tell me what those choices mean. Reach out to them. The obvious thing is don't believe everything you read or hear, and particularly on the internet. So if you can make that direct connection, you'll have a much better knowledge base than perhaps you will otherwise. So that's my challenge to both sides here, and it probably, everyone in this room falls under those headings one way or the other. Thanks for having me today. It's great to be out here. I will note that my wife and I have driven up I-65 a couple times, and I look over here at the Corvette Museum and I say, can we stop just for a little while? And her eyes kind of roll in the back of her head. No. So we keep driving. And now next time we come by here, I'm going to say, I got to go over here. Thank y'all. Have a great day.